Jeffrey Anderson is a burglar, currently in Southern Desert Correctional Center in Nevada. He was involved in a police chase in Cocoa Beach the day after Amy was murdered. Major Todd Goodyear.
He was a burglar that was actually arrested in a stolen car in Brevard County right after the murder was committed.
When he was caught, Bunny Layton's credit cards were found in the vicinity, making him a suspect, but police could never link him to the credit cards.
I know one of the things that interested the sergeant at that time was he had a couple books in the back of the thing that were like novels about homicides. And so, of course, that sparked their interest.
But there was no evidence connecting him to the crime scene or Amy.
There was a voice lineup done with him. He was not identified out of that by Bunny and Bob. I believe he was also given a polygraph in the past. You can't totally say 100%, but you feel more likely than not he wouldn't be the guy.
Hue Poeple. At one time, he had a romantic relationship with Amy, her best friend, Andrea Odell.
He was in the circle of friends. Our circle of friends really revolved a lot around music, and so he was a punk rocker. But he was a fairly troubled soul, and everybody knew he was a fairly troubled soul.
In what way?
Destructive. I mean, not literally, figuratively. I think he would cut himself. I think he was doing drugs.
Detective Wayne Simak.
There was a mention that Hugh did like to dabble with knives. He had a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, had a propensity for violence, could fly off the handle.
He didn't become a suspect until 2013, when a tip came into Crime Line.
Hue Poeple had been killed in a hit-and-run accident, and there was a comment made at a New Year's Eve party that it was karma for what he had done to Amy Gellert. We got DNA from Tallahassee where he had the autopsy done, and that was entered then into this case. We sent over to FDLE to see if we got a match.
There was no DNA match or any other piece of evidence connecting him to Amy's murder, but Poeple remains on the list of suspects. Dominic Kanika. He moved to Cocoa Beach with his girlfriend, Julie Flounders, shortly before Amy was murdered, but didn't become a suspect until a year after her death. Agent Marlon Buggs. So how does he become a suspect?
Dominic's girlfriend's working at a local restaurant called Desperados, and one of her co-workers overhears a conversation and calls up to report that she overheard Dominic's girlfriend saying that he was possibly involved with that homicide.
Investigators then learned Kanika had stolen a car and left the area the day after Amy's murder. He later moved back to Pennsylvania, where investigators tracked him down. He told them a startling story. Lieutenant Carlos Reyes.
The thing that stands out during questioning, he puts himself at the crime scene, helping out.
He claimed that on the night of the murder, he was driving home from his job as a short order cook and stopped at the crime scene.
He was just being a concerned citizen, stops and assists the deputy in putting up the crime scene tape, which is, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's unheard of.
And when investigators pulled his time card, they discovered
He wasn't at work.
they also questioned why Kanika, who was AWOL from the Marine Corps, would have stopped.
If he's a wanted person from the military, why would he stop and even be anywhere around law enforcement?
And investigators say he fits their profile of the intruder, a white male in his 20s with a mid-Atlantic accent and even a military background.
One of the things in the Marine Corps, you learn how to handle a knife. And in this case, the person knew how to handle a knife.
In reviewing some of his military records, he was examined, and they said that he's got high anxiety, he's prone to explosive behavior, potentially violent.
Kanika took a polygraph back in 1995.
Did he
pass the polygraph?
He did not.
Kanika is now in State Correctional Institution Forest in Pennsylvania for robbing a pharmacy. In that case, he had been disguised in a fedora hat, dark sunglasses, and had been armed with a BB gun. But investigators couldn't connect Kanika either to Amy or her murder. They couldn't find any mutual friends, and there wasn't any physical evidence that put him inside the house. Scott Manley. He lived in Cocoa Beach and met Amy in drug rehab. Agent Marlon Buggs.
He went to rehab, was still using the hard drugs. So here he is, he has this connection with Amy.
Manley told police he stopped at Amy's house a few hours before the murder and was one of the last people to see her.
Scott Manley tells us that even when he left the residence, that he's driving down the road, he sees Amy on her way to church. So not only has she told him that she's going to be gone, but now he sees her leaving.
And investigators say he lied about his whereabouts that night.
In his initial statement, he said that he left to go visit a friend who's in his AA. That friend says that Scott never came to his house.
When confronted by investigators, he told them a different story.
I was out trying to purchase drugs, and that's my story now. Well, that story was hard to go back and corroborate.
Andy said he had plans to go out with Amy after church, but her best friend Andrea says that's unlikely.
We had plans the night she died.
And at 9 p.m., around the time the first 911 calls were made, Manley says he was at home.
He did end up going home, and his parents, they give him an alibi at being home at a certain time.
He even canceled his plans with Amy, leaving this voicemail just 30 minutes after she had been stabbed to death.
Scott, it's like 9:30. It's too late to go out. I'll give you a ring sometime later this week. See ya.
But investigators say Manley is a con artist who failed a polygraph. Major Todd Goodyear.
There's a lot of things that make him very interesting.
Manley is currently serving time in Moorhaven Correctional Facility for drug possession and robbery charges.
He's robbed banks, he's robbed people.
Still, there's no physical evidence connecting Manley to Amy's murder.